This article is by USA Today. It is titled Student Debt Binds My Life: Why More Older Americans Are Drowning in Loans Than Ever. The author is John Marcus, the Hetchinger Report. This article was printed on September 1st, 2023. Happy Sunday. Thanks for being with me. Marjorie Center was still in her 20s when she took out a loan for about $5,000 to get college credits she hoped would eventually add up to a bachelor's degree. The goal was thwarted when her partner became ill. The burden of our living expenses fell on me, said Center, who lives in the Dallas suburbs. I devoted all of my resources to keeping our heads above water. But while Center never got her degree, that student loan kept growing. Now, at 74 years old, she owes more than $55,000, or 10 times what was originally borrowed, because of that interest, which for millions of borrowers like her resumes. She has put off any hope of retiring. Center still works as a legal secretary, juggling her student loan debt with other expenses, including medical costs from recent cancer treatments. It is easy to say, why could she not take care of a small $5,000 student loan? But we have to remember that many of us, myself included, guys, we are one major illness away from being broke. And something like cancer, whether it be for you or your loved ones, many of us are just one illness away. And so it's easy to go and to criticize and say, why couldn't you just pay off $5,000? It's not that much. She took it out in her 20s. She's now 74. Perhaps we could be a little critical and say that there was some money management going on, because $5,000, no, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of money, but we're also putting it against the backdrop of what college costs today, where we think, well, $5,000 is really small. Yes, in today's terms. Now remember, she's 74, and her pay in her 20s wasn't like what we would get in pay today. It's like me. Okay, I make 63,000 after 19 years of teaching. My parents, their entire career never made that, and they're all retired teachers. So we have to make sure we're looking at the appropriate background. I am sure that even with the cancer, okay, we could be a little critical and say, okay, did you have cancer the entire time from age 20 to 74? No. Was there possibly some money management and, with that 5,000 where money could have been used to pay off that $5,000 debt? Probably. But how many 20-year-olds today have money management? See, this is why, folks, we have to be so careful that you don't take out so much debt that if something happens later in life, you can't afford that bill. Although I don't know anyone, if you have a good job and you get cancer treatment and stuff, okay, I'm very fortunate to be in a profession. But I imagine to myself, we don't really know the circumstances of why she couldn't pay off what seems like a small bill, but it's all relative. She says here that she never got her degree and the student loan kept growing. You notice nothing changes over the years? So those of you that are young today that are going, that the older people just don't understand the student loan situation you're in. Yes, we do. I do. Okay. I'm just turned 58. This lady here, Marjorie, she's 74. She understands it. We've had a student loan problem for generations in this country, and I don't see any immediate resolution to it. Even with the big, beautiful bill and stuff, it shuffles the money around. It doesn't actually fix the root problem. And as you know, I see it as two root problems. One, colleges charge too freaking much for their education. And because the government backs up the education, it encourages colleges to charge even more for it. Let me adjust this screen here real quick. Boom, boom, there. So between those two things, okay, this is sad. She says she's putting off any hope of retiring. I wonder if I could have retired with my $110,000 student loan, which would have been well above $110,000 in 11 years when I retired at 68. It would have been well above the 110 it currently grew to. It went from 85 to 110 over 16 years, and then it would have grown some more for the next 11 years. I'd like to think that I would have still been able to retire. They would have taken out 15% of my retirement for the rest of my life. But we have to remember that paying 15% for something that you're not even using anymore, especially when you're retired. Okay. It's bad enough when you are working and you owe student loans and you're not working in the degree that you got your student loan in. But then when you're retired, you're not doing anything with it. It's just an old bill that's tagged along with you your entire life. So putting off any hope of retiring. And she's a legal secretary. I sometimes wonder if I would have retired. Could I have retired? In my mind, I would have been able to retire. That was kind of the plan. And I think I could have done it. Even having a 15% student loan garnishment that they would have done at retirement. But that's only because, I don't have kids. I live well below my means. It could have been done. But it is scary. At what cost? What would have had to have been sacrificed? My payments are as small as I can make them since I cannot repay the full amount. My financial goals are to be able to pay my rent, afford my car and medical bills, and hopefully be able to provide for my own funeral expenses. She isn't joking. Center expects to never get rid of her student loan obligation. How many people right now are in this position right here? My payments are as small as I can make them. How many times have we seen, yay, hip, hip, hooray, because someone has a 0%, they have zero monthly payment on their student loan, yet they don't realize that balance is just growing. When your payments are as small as you can make them, you have borrowed too much. And I understand people borrow too much. I borrowed too much. We all borrow it on the hope and dream that we will be able to better our future. I have never met anyone in my personal travels of life that has said, yeah, I took out student loan debt just because, I wanted to have fun and party for 4 years. The ultimate goal, at least of the people that I've known that took out student loan debt, is they wanted a better future for themselves, or their parents took out the student loan debt for their children because their parents wanted them to have a better future, even though on a Parent Plus loan, it might have sunk their own future retirement, which is never a good idea in my opinion. Oh, and also don't forget, if you're on SAVE, the SAVE interest starts August 1st, 2025. So it starts in a matter of weeks. So if you're on the SAVE plan, that's been deferred for a long period of time, years, okay, because they're waiting for a Supreme Court ruling or not, interest starts August 1st. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news on a Sunday late morning. Okay, so she expects to never get rid of her student loan debt. Yep. What am I doing here? Other people expect never to get rid of their student loan debt either. Young people, you have a lot of company in, I don't like to say you're elders, okay, because I'm 58, all right, but you have a lot of company. This has been going on for a long time. I think it's only in the last maybe, millennial generation on that it's gotten a lot of traction because of how high college costs has gotten. But even when college costs weren't high, people still struggle to pay their student loan. And I totally understand why someone of the young generation today would look at someone like Marjorie. I understand it and go, you couldn't pay off $5,000 when the living was good and things were less expensive and you couldn't pay off 5,000. In my mind, I'm thinking she should have been able to pay it off. But even though she's a legal secretary, she could have been living on very low wages back then. So we don't know. This is not by and large debt that parents assumed to send their kids to college. For 3/4 of federal borrowers 65 and older, it's money they borrowed for their own education and have been paying off for decades. I will attach at the end the stories I've done on. There was one of a woman in her 70s also, and she has student loan debt. I will attach some at the end. Older borrowers with massive amounts of student loan debt. And while we may not consider her debt at $55,000 to be massive, we again have to remember the time period and the pay that she was making when she was in her 20s. Oh, this lady here in the picture is some woman that testifies on Congress. So that's not her, okay? That's not Marjorie. But when we think about the time that Marjorie took out that $5,000 loan, she could have been making just, I won't say a few bucks an hour, but it certainly wasn't a lot if she's 74 today. That's a situation about to get worse. talking about people getting into student loan debt. More people with even larger student loan debt are aging into retirement, just as the Biden administration's plan to forgive up to 20,000 of this debt for recipients, as you know, was challenged by the Supreme Court. So we know that's really not going anywhere. A lot of people think of student debt as being a young people's issue, but when you segment the population by age, the people with the fastest growing debt are older. Many older Americans with student loan debt face retirement with less money than their classmates who didn't have to borrow, according to researchers. And as they try to pay off what they owe, they're at the mercy of a patchwork of private companies assembled by the Department of Education to service loans, which often fail to provide information about payment plans tied to income and other ways to manage the debt. Now then, let me just go ahead and shorten this right there so we can follow. And when we talk about here about the private companies assembled by the DOE to service the loans, when I had my student loan and I was, going through my divorce and stuff like that in 2013, and I wanted to basically take the loans and pause them and all of that. The student loan provider at the time, who was it? Fed Loan. Okay. How quickly we forget their name because I want them out of my life as fast as possible. Fed Loan never bothered to tell me that I could continue paying on my loans and staying on PSLF because I'm a teacher and all that. They just, when I said the only thing I knew was about forbearance, they said, sure, we'll go ahead and forbearance. And I was on forbearance for at least a year. The private companies that are running these student loans, a lot of them, you guys, it's not in their best interest to help you manage your student loan to help you get out of debt. It's not, because they make their money, and to a certain extent, rightfully so, okay, they make their money based on interest. And I understand that. And I don't even disagree with that to a certain extent. The problem is they're not really honest in how they explain to people the different ways to pay off their loan. So instead of saying to me, hey, Carrie, you could pay less money each month. We know you're suffering a little bit financially. So you know what? Why don't we just put you on an income-based repayment plan, and you can continue working and paying off your PSLF towards the 120. They didn't tell me that. Instead, they just put me on forbearance and a non-IBR plan. You see, private companies are not there to help the young and the old with their student loan debt. That's why it's important that you help yourself. And the first thing you have to do is you have to be willing to admit what you cannot afford to borrow. Because we all want to look at what we can borrow. Oh, yeah, we can borrow to the moon. Just like when you buy a house, I didn't have to buy $100,000 place. I could have easily gone up to $250,000. And keep in mind, this was in 2020 when the Eaton was pretty good on property. Okay. I could have easily gotten 2.5, possibly even 300, because I came in with more than I had something like around 70,000 in cash. So yeah, I could have really, really stretched it, but just because you can stretch it and start it doesn't mean you're gonna be able to finish it. So oftentimes what winds up happening is people go to look at their, how much they can borrow for student loan, and they look at how much can they borrow. I want you to start looking at how much can you not afford to borrow. That changes things. Student loan borrowers have been failed by multiple systems. New America's project director for education says our higher education system hasn't served them well, and the student loan repayment system also doesn't serve them well. And the repayment system, as it's going to be today with the BBB bill, that's Trump's big beautiful bill, I don't think it's going to be easier. I think it's just going to be this. It's going to be like pushing the dinner around on the plate. Nothing gets eaten. Nothing gets changed. It's all the same stuff that we've been looking at. We're just going to shift positions. Now you're going to be down to, I think, 2 payment plans. It's going to be the standard plan and then the reassistance payment plan. I think something called WRAP. This is life and death for people. It's not that older borrowers with debt don't want to pay it back. Geez Louise, I'm having a tough time today. Many say they simply cannot afford to. How many times have we heard that? It's not that I don't want to pay back for that art, history, science, math, teaching degree. I can't afford to. And that's because we took out that loan. Again, what did I just say? We did not look at what we can't afford to borrow. We only looked at what we can borrow. And if you look at what you can borrow, you're going to be in too much student loan debt, too much car debt, and too much house debt. Older Americans with student loan debt take second jobs, delay retirement, are less likely to own their own homes, and suffer low credit scores. More than 60% say they don't have enough savings to cover their expenses for 3 months in emergency. 9% say their student loan debt has forced them to forego medical care. How many of us, in some way or another, have sacrificed some medical care to cover student loan debt? When I was I guess at the peak of my divorce and trying to pay my student loan and everything else, and I was on income-based payment, thank you, Jesus. And by the way, don't forget if you're PSLF, it gets forgiven tax-free. But if you're not PSLF, it's forgiven with IRS taxes, and it's forgiven on that new higher balance that you've been paying on for 2025 and now what will be respectively 30 years. I oftentimes would I don't have to do it anymore, but oftentimes with my, knee arthritis medications and other medications I've had to take, how many of us, let's all admit it, we take it every other day. We don't take it every day, we take it every other day or when we think we absolutely need it. I'm very fortunate I don't have to do that anymore, but there was a time where I would not take my medication every single day because I had to take stuff for osteoporosis and all that. So I would just take it every other day. I don't have to do that anymore, knock on wood. This is life and death for people. This is the difference between being able to eat, make rent, to pay a mortgage. Even before the pandemic, nearly twice as many older borrowers as younger borrowers said that they were behind on repaying their student loans. You know why the older borrowers, I think, are more behind? It's the fact that older borrowers have more financial obligations. Young people, I want you to look at this paragraph right here. And I want to tie it back to something I discuss quite frequently. When you are young, it is very easy to say, I want to go to this school and I'm willing to make all the sacrifices necessary so I can get there. But what you forget is between the time you graduate and the time that 20-year student loan is paid off or forgiven that later turns into an IRS bill, you may get married, you may want to have kids, you may want to move to a certain city place. At some point, you're going to say to yourself, I am so freaking sick and tired of paying on this student loan bill. I've been paying $500 a month for the last 7 years. I am over it. I want to have a child, yada, yada. And before you know it, that student loan bill goes on the back burner. Everything else about your life goes on the front. And you wind up being the next retiring generation with student loan debt. See how this works. We take out so much debt that we don't allow ourselves room to have other emergencies come in. I know I look at my 2 knee surgeries that I had, one in 2018 respectively, I think it was, and then one in 2022. Each of those surgeries cost me, okay, a few thousand out of pocket. I imagine to myself, and I remember thinking this even when I had the surgeries, how fortunate I was that I live so far beneath my means that I am able to comfortably pay for the things that I need for my knees. Okay, I had to pay for 2 braces. They're $700 on each leg. Okay, I don't wear them all the time, but when I need to. And how much of a struggle that would have been if you had backed me up 15, 20 years ago. Oh, heck, you would put me in my 30s and tell me I had all these medical things I needed to buy, I would have been flat broke. They would have been going on credit card after credit card. See, one of the advantages of living so far beneath your means is that you have room to put in things that, well, you may not want to pay for them. Okay. I don't want to pay for braces. I don't want to pay for osteoporosis, extra medication. I don't want to have to, there are things that we just don't want to pay for, but aren't we lucky that we can pay for them because we chose to live so far beneath our means, or we chose to make sure that, there's enough savings, whatever it takes to be able to afford these things. The approximately $10,000 I think I've spent over the last 5 years just for my knees. That's it. That would have financially bankrupted me in my 20s and 30s, possibly even early 40s. But by the time I was in my 50s, I was prepared. Did I want to spend $10,000 on knees? No. But I'm able to do it, and I continue to do it. I can afford to take my medication every single day. These older borrowers, you guys, young people, take note. They're struggling more because they simply have more responsibilities. They may even be taking care, depending upon their age. Okay, if they're like Gen X, my age, I think they sometimes, the sandwich generation, they may even be taking care of their older parents. There comes a point when you're simply going to get tired of taking care of your student loans and you're going to want something else. Marjorie, in this article, took out $5,000 in her 20s, but life started happening. And pretty soon that $5,000 just goes to the back burner. Now, if I'm 58, 68, 19, 1, 2, okay, so she's about 16 years older than me. Okay. So we're not so far off that I can't relate to, her time period to some extent, even though I'm a different generation. All right. But if I did think about it, do I think it would be possible to pay off $5,000 in student loans? Yeah, overall, I do think it's possible. Even back then. Not saying it would have been fun, but I do think it would have been possible. But we can't blame her for money mismanagement any more than we can blame us today, any more than I can blame myself for money mismanagement until I corrected the error of my ways. But this is why older borrowers are struggling so much. And she's right. Is it going to be to eat, to make rent, or to pay a mortgage? Pick a bill. Pick which one you want to sacrifice. Scrolling on. Okay, she's 74. This can lead to the most dire consequences for older borrowers, that being having to pick, rent, food, medicine, okay? Having their Social Security benefits garnished, which is triggered when a loan has been delinquent for 270 days. Everything above $750 that a retiree receives each month from Social Security, or 15% of the benefit, whichever is lower, can be withheld and applied to the debt. Let me just pause right there and read that again. Right there. Okay. So Marjorie's 74. I'm going to read this little part again. Let me back it up here so the audience that's viewing can see it. This can lead to the most dire consequences for older borrowers. Having their Social Security benefits garnished, which is triggered when a loan has been delinquent for 270 days. Everything above $750 that a retiree receives each month from Social Security, or 15% of the benefit, whichever is lower, can be withheld and applied to the debt. Sweet Jesus. Wow. Maybe I have been reading it wrong. I always thought, I read these articles for the first time with you guys. I always thought it was all of my Social Security and 15%. That's what they would take out, 15% of my Social Security. It's everything above $750 that a retiree receives each month. And they underline everything above that, or it's 15% of the benefit, whichever is lower. And that's because some people may not even receive. Okay, I understanding now. That's because some people may not even receive $750 in Social Security. So whichever is lower. So if you don't even get $750 in Social Security, then they'll take 15% because that would be lower. I think I'm reading that's right. Can be withheld and applied to the debt. I'd have been screwed. I'd have been royally, royally screwed. This means Uncle Sam is leaving you at retirement $750 to live on. I do believe I'm reading that right. Somebody, Jamie, anybody. Okay, Jamie's my gal pal, all right? Tell me if I'm reading this correctly. I think I am, because I'm looking at it here on the page. I'm blown away because I didn't think it says everything above 750. That means they can take basically your entire check. It says, or 15% of the benefit, whichever is lower. So is it everything above 750 or 15% of the benefit? Oh my God. Okay. Somebody help me with that. I'm just in shock. All right. Some 114,000 Americans have had their Social Security garnished because they couldn't make their student loan repayment. You gonna let that be you? How many people said, oh, I really got to go to this school. This is the place I want to go. I really want this degree, even though they know they can't make the student loan payment. The student loan company is not your friend. Always remember that. They are not there to help you, or the Parent Plus borrowers, okay? They're not there to help you either. This drives many older borrowers into poverty. Okay. Anybody, I need you to tell me if I am understanding that section correctly. Because if I am understanding, I'm still stuck on it. I know, okay? If this is what I actually understand, then I have understood it wrong and I would have been royally screwed. I would not have been able to retire because if they're going to take everything above $750, sorry, I accidentally switched screens. If they're going to take everything above $750, I would have been royally screwed. So somebody tell me if I am reading this correctly. All right. Absent the student debt, they might have had a decent income. They didn't do anything wrong, but they shouldn't have had this debt. Yet, even as money from their Social Security benefits is diverted to repay their loans, some see their balances continue to increase thanks to interest. I don't want anyone in my audience retiring with this type of debt. I don't want to retire with that type of debt. And remember, when you're retired, you're not earning more income. Typically, that's the reason you're retired. So, how are you going to avoid that debt going up and up? Student loan debt will put you in poverty. And I know people go to school because we all want to make more money. We have an interest in a career, a hobby, whatever. We know not to go to school for hobby, but you understand my point. People are getting into these massive debts and they're not realizing how hard it is to get out of it. Hey, before you take on that, 15, I don't know, let's make it more realistic. The average American debt is $36,000. How many young people taking on, that's the average student loan debt, 38,000 respectively, okay, for 2025. How many young people have even paid off $1,000? It's part of the problem. We don't have young people don't have a concept of what it takes to pay off that debt. And I was stupid. I got mine in my 30s, my two masters. I certainly had a concept of what it was to pay off $1,000. I didn't have a concept of how the student loan payments were set up so you could never pay it off if you made the payment arrangements as they are set and guided by the student loan company. I never knew that if I made, if I got onto an income-based repayment plan and I made the payments on that IBR plan, that my debt would never be paid off. I know that now. Scrolling. It isn't only older Americans with lower incomes who are weighed down by student loan debt, says Carolina Rodriguez. Her clients range from people living in homeless shelters to judges. Wow. You ever thought that a judge could have so much student loan debt? Well, yeah, but law school? Wouldn't it be interesting? We not that I would want it, but we all walk around and you can see everybody's student loan bill, above their head or something. I think we'd be shocked. I think we'd be shocked at the people in careers that are severely in debt, even though they're in very good, prestigious careers. We are at another level of crisis, she says. Take Charles Earl. He spent 8 years in the 1990s getting a doctoral degree. Oh, here we go with a doctoral degree. Getting a doctoral degree in computer science at the University of Chicago, from which he graduated with $70,000 of student loan debt. Now at age 61, he owes $136,000 and his son is starting college. I sure hope he's not taking out a Parent Plus loan. I guess we'll make it work somehow. I don't really know how, said Earl, who lives in Decatur, Georgia, and works as a software developer. We want to make sure he doesn't have to go through this. I've learned that lesson. Well, I sure hope he's not taking out a Parent Plus loan. So he went and got a doctoral degree in computer science. And he's 61, so he's only a few years older than I am. And $136,000 in debt. So how many times have I said, I don't think a doctoral degree today pays off? I think on my parents' day it did. My dad's 85. I think in the olden days, the doctoral degree paid off, but not today. I wouldn't waste my money on a doctoral degree today unless I was already in a job and they were going to pay for it. Then fine, I'll go ahead and get a doctoral degree. I'm already established. I'm in a position and the company wants to pay for it. A doctoral degree today, I know I've known people with doctoral degrees that are $200,000 in debt to be a public servant for a doctoral degree. The doctorate degree today is not what it used to be. And I've said before, I think it was really watered down when we started doing all this online schooling stuff. And schools became for profit. I think that watered down the doctoral degree a lot. I guess we'll make it work somehow. I don't really know how. Oh, I read that paragraph already. Thanks in large part to his student loan debt, Earl has no immediate plans to retire. He said, it's most likely that I'm going to be working for the next 10 years and praying that my health holds out. Pray that your knees hold out, your back holds out. He's 61, so he retires at next 10 years. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say it's most likely he's not going to be retiring in the next 10 years. And why do I say that? Because if you couldn't pay off the student loan debt in your working years, okay, trying to retire with student loan debt is going to be even harder. Now, he wants to retire, I'm assuming, free of student loan debt, but I'm still going to say statistically, I don't think he will, because he's in his peak yearning too, okay? He's in his peak earning years, and he wasn't able to pay it off, and he's holding on to $136,000. So I'm going to say statistically, he won't pay it off in 10 years. Guys, any of us that are in our 60s with student loan debt, dang, if we could have paid it off by now, we would have. This is why I hold, unless there's some dramatic change in income, I hold very little hope. When people are in their 50s, and again, they don't have the assets and they don't have the income. If you have the assets and you have the income, and you can pay that sucker off, great. But it seems like a lot of the articles that we focus on, at least on this channel, are people who do not have the income and the assets to pay off the debt. You're working until you're 71 years old. More Americans appear to be headed for this same fate. The proportion who have student loan debt continues to increase, with more borrowers ages 35 to 61 holding debt than those who are 62 and older. Are you headed for that fate? Have you really done the math? Or are you too scared? And I respect it. I respect it if you are. I've been there, too scared. But I have to be honest, I've never been so scared that I wouldn't face the debt, clearly. Because if you're going to go for something like PSLF, you know how on top of the news you have to be? You got to be on top of the news. By the way, don't forget to subscribe, because I do keep you up on student loan debt here. Okay. And I think it was Mr. D who even said I was the first channel that he saw that talked about the big, beautiful bill, as far as some of the details about it in passing. So I really do try to be as on top of this as possible. Okay. So please do consider subscribing to this channel for that. All right. And of course, evictions and all other things yummy and tasty. Okay. So don't be headed into that debt, 35 to 61. These are numbers we would have never heard in my 20s and 30s growing up. We would have never heard of this. Student loan debt didn't even make news in my 20s. Now, some people say, well, that's just because, Carrie, you didn't have student loans. True, but even amongst all my friends, everybody pretty much paid for college up front. Or if there was a loan, it was really not that significant. This is becoming a bigger problem, says Cyan Liu, a research economist. Biden's loan forgiveness plan would have erased the student debt, but we know it did not. And we all knew it wasn't going to work. Even I knew it wasn't going to work. Okay. People are already coming to us and saying we can't pay it. There's a problem when someone graduates from college and they're really surprised about their student loan bill. And then they're even more surprised about how much the student loan bill is going to cost. That's because, and I'm guilty of it too, okay, because we didn't do the homework before we took out the loan. Remember, when you buy a house, the realtor is going to give you a big budget that you can have, much bigger than what you can actually afford. Same thing with student loan debt. They're going to tell you, oh, you can borrow $40,000 a year to attend this school if you'd like for 4 years. But your budget will only take $10,000. It's off to community college, and there's nothing wrong with that. About 1 in 5 borrowers will struggle to make their payments. A survey of consumers put the number even higher. Well, nearly 4 in 10 said they'll need to cut other expenses to afford their payments. I'm afraid that among the highest potential for delinquency and default is going to be this group, and that's the group of older borrowers. Yeah. Older borrowers, too much to afford. And also, if you're an older borrower and you don't own your property, you're stuck at the mercy of rent. Now, I know people say, yeah, but you got taxes and all that. I'll be totally honest. At 58 years old, I've never known a single soul to lose their property because they couldn't afford the taxes. But I know people who have had foreclosures. Okay. But I've never known people who, oh my God, the taxes were so high that I couldn't afford it. Even HOA fees. I haven't known anyone who's lost their place because of an HOA fee. Of course, I live very modestly, so that might be a difference. I don't live on a high rise that's 15 floors up on the beach. I'd like to, but I couldn't afford the HOA. Okay, it feels very helpless. There are some ways to escape this, that being the student loan debt and retiring broke and impoverished, depending on the type of the original loan. Borrowers with federal family education or Perkin loans can consolidate them into direct loans. Now, um, I'm not going to read that part because, with the big, beautiful bill, and this was printed in 2023. So I'm just going to skip that. Of course, this will be linked in the description box for those who would like to watch it. Okay. Mary Donahue, a social worker in private practice in Richmond, Virginia, who has converted her loans into income contingent repayment and will have them forgiven in 2037. She'll be nearly 76 by then, however, and will have paid $159,000 on her loans. The principal was $109,000. She will have paid almost $60,000 in interest. And don't forget, she's going to be 76. And if she is not she's a social worker in private practice. Okay. She's going to have to pay taxes on it. PSLF, hold on, I need beverage. She's a social worker in private practice. That is not PSLF. So she's going to owe taxes on the $159,000. Do you see how this works? This is a nasty, nasty situation to get into with student debt. So at 80, she'll be busy paying off the taxes. Let's say 25%. I'd even go up as high as 30. 25% good on that. Now, some people go, well, that's better than paying the 160. True. No, she will have paid 160. Excuse me. So whatever her taxes will be, people go, well, that's better than, paying whatever the balance is, because that's when she gets her forgiveness. But she's going to owe taxes on it. It feels helpless, said Donahue, now 61. I can't imagine retiring. I will have to work for the rest of my life. The only positive thing is my debt will not be left to my children. Again, I'm going to beg somebody, Jamie or somebody. Am I reading this Social Security thing correctly? The reason it's just kicking me is that means I've misunderstood it and I could have never retired with $110,000 debt. Social Security takes everything above $750. And this is what's forcing people to work for the rest of their life. I just need someone to back me up and tell me if I'm correct in this, okay? I will have to work the rest of my life. The only positive thing is that my debt will not be left to my children. Well, it never would be left to your children because they didn't sign off. So that's kind of, they had nothing to do with the debt. There are some ways out of this. People who believe they were misled by recruiters and went to college universities that closed before they finished a degree can petition for their debt to be forgiven. I'm going to say at this point, probably most of the forgiveness stuff was probably done during the Biden era. I'm going to link this in the description box so people can read it. There is a program called Fresh Start, which is, I've actually heard about Fresh Start. Okay. Oh, that's only available for 1 year. Okay. I'm going to skip this paragraph because, again, this is kind of dated. All right. There are other consequences to this problem, that being the student loan problem. At a time when college enrollment is already plummeting, something we heard a lot of in our focus groups is that when someone had a negative experience with their college loans, they were more likely to tell younger generations that higher education wasn't worth it. Exactly. Why would I get on this channel and say to you, hey, guys, you know what? We'll run up a whole bunch of college debt. Go for it. No, I'm warning you. That's the whole reason the initial reason this channel started was a fitness program. Okay. And then it moved into student loans. Colleges, my slipper's falling off. This is casual, by the way. It's a lovely Sunday afternoon. Colleges, I believe, are going to shoot themselves in the foot if they're not careful. It's like that greedy corporate machine. Okay. The greedy. They're going to eat themselves alive till there's nothing left. If colleges aren't careful, and never generations. I'm not talking people. Colleges don't need to be freaking worried about 1, 2 people. They need to be worried about generations of family members saying, don't go to college. Look how it destroyed my retirement. Don't go to college. Look how it kept me from getting a house, having a child, or even, or more kids if I want it. Look at how it's kept me trapped in this town, city, state, whatever. Yes. And people need to be telling other people this. I don't feel sorry for colleges when they sit and they go, well, we just don't want other people telling people not to go to college. Heck, why would we not tell you not to go to college? Go to college on a dollar that you can afford. The hard part is going to be, can you admit that you can't afford that degree? That part is going to be on you as the borrower, because we're all here telling you, don't do it. So yeah, Older generations are more likely to tell younger generations that higher education isn't worth it. It's not that it's not worth it. It's not worth it at the cost of your very life.